We have been talking about methods and calling the methods. Today we'll talk about a very special method called init for initialization, and we've been using it like right here when I created an instance of my customer called my customer. I called this method init. Basically, on the customer I called alloc. It allocated memory for a customer object, and to that object, which is of type customer, I call a method called init. So it should be in customer. If I look in it, it's not there. So where is it? Basically what happens is, this is the implementation of my customer, right? Now if you go drill down further and look at the customer.h, you see the customer.h inherits from NS object. So the init method is in NS object. NS object is the parent of everything implicitly. I wrote it down, typed it here to be explicit, but implicitly, even if this is the case, implicitly everything inherits from NS object. So this is explicit. Even if I delete it, it's implicit. It's the job of the compiler to make sure, well, if it inherits from nothing else, then it inherits from NS object. And if you customer inherits from something, another class, that class inherits from another class, but ultimately every class inherits from NS object. So the init method that we see here is actually in NS object. Now you can override it, like right here. And it goes like this. Of course, the minus sign, its return type is ID. It's called init, and it returns self. Self is a special keyword. It means this particular class. We talk in the customer class, self means this self, me, this particular customer object. So that's what self is. So very first line is that you call the super init method of the super class, which is the parent class. Also super class, parent class, same thing. And what is the super class or parent class of it? Well, let's call the parent class the super class. Customers superclass is NS object. So I'm calling init method on the NS object in this case. And that creates an object, assigns it to self, and then I make a little check. If there was no problem on line number 42, then do something here and return it. So this is essentially called overriding. I have overridden the default init method in the NS object. Now why would I want to do that? Sometimes you want to initialize, make sure when somebody calls the init, you initialize these variables to their default values. As I talked about in the previous tutorial, when you declare a variable, you should make sure it's initialized to some default value, or that's the biggest point. The biggest number of errors are when an object is a variable is declared, but it's not initialized. So that's one way why you wanna override the init method. The other would be maybe you wanna open a connection to a database or web service. So there are a number of cases when you wanna override the init method. So that's your init method, and you have overridden it. Now if we were to set a breakpoint right there and run this application, I see I come in here, and when I say step into, where did I go? I go into customer class. I'm in the customer. This is the customer class's init method. And if I'm going to step over it, but it called the NS object super, and it did whatever it had to do. And now self has a memory object, it's not null, it has been created, everything is okay. So if self would let your code go in here to line 45, and you could do anything you want here, and it'll return the self, and now everything is good. Now let's talk about the next one. The next one is an init method that takes a parameter, and that's how you do that. For that, one is that it does not exist. It could be anything that you want, so it's not in the NS object. You have to declare it in the header file. Like I want to init with age, and it'll take a variable called the age, and its data type is going to be int. Return type is still going to be id. And then I implement it. I do the same kind of thing. The very first thing I would do is call the super NS objects init method, and that's a must. Must do that. And then I check if there was no problem, and then I set the age variable right here to whatever I sent into this parameter. We'll go to viewcontroller.m, and I'm going to back up a little bit and try to type init. You see now I got init and init with age. So I'm going to say now I'm going to init with age. 29 there. So I'm going to init with age and send in parameter 29. Let's see what that'll do. When I step into, you see, where did it go? It went into init with age. If I step into, it didn't go in here. Looks like it should, super.init. No, super is NS object. What's the super of customer? NS object. So it called the init in the super object, and the age is 29, and then it sets the age is 0, the age is 29. Step over, and at this point the self object has age of 29. So an object of age customer has been created. Its default age has been set to 29. When I come back here, my customer has an age of 29. So that's your init method that takes in a parameter. Now what if I want to call from a constructor? Let's talk about constructor chaining. I want init with age to call this init, and that init will call NS objects init. How do I do that? I use self. Let's run it. When I step into it, I came into init with age. I step into it, I came into line 42 init, and then I step over it. Now NS objects init. So now essentially I have done the constructor chaining. The init is also known as a constructor. So this is how I have chained these methods to call one initialization init method that takes a parameter, calls the other one that does not take the parameter, and that calls the one in the super. So they're between super and self, and I hope you see what's going on behind the scene. So you would do this because you want, when you create an object, you want to provide an option to just pass in some values. And if they don't pass in some values, go to the chain to another constructor that provides some default values. So there could be several reasons why you want to do that. So we have looked, we've seen the init method that takes a parameter and construct, which is essentially overriding the init method and also chaining the init method. I want to show you something related to Xcode. I talked about it in my Xcode tutorials. and it has to do with just working efficiently like a pro within Xcode. There's a little gray vertical strip right here. I'm moving my cursor. You see how the cursor looks like? I'm gonna move it to the left. I'm moving to the left. As soon as you come over it, there's a little strip here, right here. As I move over it, you see the little down arrow head, up arrow head shows up, and the if block is highlighted in white. The one around it is a little bit gray, and the one around it is even more gray, giving you a little hierarchy of what you're looking at. So if I move my cursor up a little bit, reach this arrowhead pointing down, and I click, the if block of code is collapsed. It turns into three dots, ellipses, or continuation. There's something under here. If I click on it, I double click those three, the ellipses, and it revealed that block. I'm going to go back here, click on it, and you see there are three ellipses. I can also move a little bit to the left to this revealed triangle, click it, and this will expand again. I'm going to move back in here, and I'm going to start moving up. You see, when I reach here, it disappears. You see what's going on? It's because of this little breakpoint on line 51. So I'm going to get off of it and stay 1 millimeter to the right and avoid going over it. Yeah, yeah, you have to be careful. Even if, but never mind. You can even go around it and go here. It'll show up again. So I basically go around it like that and reach this arrowhead and click it. Now the whole method is collapsed, and you see an ellipse. And in order to reveal it, double click it and it'll show up again. So that's how you can collapse whole sections of code. I'm gonna collapse. You see now the whole init and init with age is collapsed. Both of these methods are collapsed. So when you're looking at a very long piece of code, you can make it easier on yourself.